During the Pokemon Presents last month, I was hoping for the reveal of Pokken Tournament 2, but sadly it didn't happen. The original Pokken sold decently well, especially for the Wii U. It sold well enough to receive an enhanced port in 2017. The Pokemon Championships announced that Pokken Tournament would no longer be featured at the event after 2022. This leaves many people, including myself, to believe that there may be a possibility of a new entry in the series. The Pokemon Company has tended to only make mobile spin-off games within the last couple of years, with some exceptions, but what if there was a Pokken Tournament 2? Today we are going to speculate which Pokemon could be playable in the new entry. Now something I've always liked about Pokken is the diversity in fighters, from playstyle, elemental typing, size, and generation. The original Pokken offered a wide variety of Pokemon to choose from, and that's something I would like to see continue. A part of keeping the roster interesting is keeping it fresh. And as the original game is still playable on the Nintendo Switch, I decided to cut a majority of the old characters. But how many characters in total will there be? Including returning and newcomers, I predict 23 different playable fighters. Now if you're wondering how I came to that conclusion, the Pokken Tournament DX port featured 21 characters at launch, and later added 2 more via DLC. I think it's safe to assume if they were to make a sequel, they would aim to increase the number of total characters, while also keeping the roster manageable. Starting with the returning roster, I've taken an extremely minimalist approach. Starting off with the most obvious, Pikachu will 100% return. Pikachu Libre, a different version of Pikachu, will also return, but not as a separate character, but rather an alternate costume. Next we have Charizard, one of the most popular Pokemon, and will definitely return. The Pokemon Company makes sure to include him within every game and spin-off game. During the promotion of the original Pokken, Lucario was often seen as a second protagonist alongside Pikachu, so I've kept him on the roster. Mewtwo is the final returning Pokemon I have decided to keep, and yes, I'm aware, that would mean only 4 returning characters, something that could leave many fans upset, but I think it's necessary in order to keep the roster feeling new. Mewtwo staying really isn't a big surprise. He's one of the most well Pokemon, and his Shadow form played the main antagonist within the story mode of the original Pokken. Other characters like Gengar and Sceptile will most likely return, but for the sake of simplicity, I'll only be counting these 4. Now on to the newcomers. I've divided the newcomers into 2 sections, brand new fighters and replacement fighters. The brand new fighters are completely original to the Pokken series, and the replacement fighters are Pokemon that would fill in a gap left by the original roster with a regional form or related Pokemon. If I leave out any Pokemon you would like to see, make sure to leave it in the comments down below. Scizor was my main in the original Pokken, but in the new entry, I've replaced Scizor with Scyther's other evolution, Kleavor, a Pokemon introduced fairly recently in Legends Arceus. This bug rock Pokemon would use the stone on his arms to strike his enemies. He would be slower than Scizor but with a bigger punch. The next replacement Pokemon is another one from Legends Arceus. Hisuian Decidueye would fill in the void left by the original Decidueye's absence, and the final replacement Pokemon is Gallade, who admittedly would play very different to Gardevoir, but as they both evolved from the same Pokemon, I've included them with the replacement Pokemon. Now onto the brand new Pokemon that are completely original to this series. I've attempted to create a list of Pokemon comprised of multiple typings and generations. I've also tried to include popular and relevant Pokemon, and not just my personal favorites. The first of the new Pokemon I've included is Alakazam. I imagine Alakazam being a distanced fighter. Alakazam would fill in the spot for a new Psychic Pokemon and Generation 1 Pokemon. Next is Smeargle, who would offer a unique playstyle. Smeargle is quite a small Pokemon, which is something the original Pokken was lacking. He would have a very unconventional way of attacking. He would use his paintbrush tail to splash paint on the enemies and draw pictures that would attack said enemy. With Smeargle now on the roster, that takes up the need for a normal type Pokemon and a Generation 2 Pokemon. Next we have a pretty obscure Pokemon, Breloom. Breloom would be a traditional fighter, attacking quickly and close up. Making this list, I've also tried to create a contrast of standard and legendary or mythical Pokemon. The first of said mythical Pokemon is Victini. Victini would be a small, floaty fighter who would attack from a distance. He would be the only fire-type Pokemon other than Charizard. Greninja is a highly popular Pokemon, and it's a big surprise he hasn't debuted in the series yet. Greninja would be a fast fighter with the ability to create clones of himself. Next we have another Generation 6 starter Pokemon. Chestnut would be a slow and tanky fighter who would be able to block incoming attacks with ease. The opposite of Chestnut's bulky style is the quick and slim Zeraora. Zeraora would be an extremely quick fighter, one of the fastest on the roster. He would deliver several blows in a quick succession to take down his foes. Before making this list, I knew I wanted to include one Ultra Beast on the roster, and after taking a look at all these Pokemon's weird designs, I settled on selecting Buzzwole. Buzzwole would be a pretty standard fighter, delivering heavy blows similar to Machamp. Next I have the Ghost-type representative of the game, Marshadow. Marshadow would be able to move quickly around the stage by sinking into the shadows and sneaking up to deliver devastating blows on the opponent. The Pokemon Go original Pokemon, Melmetal, makes his debut. He would be able to morph to avoid attacks and get closer to enemies. He can do a mix of close and faraway punches. Sirfetch'd is up next. He uses his sword to attack and his shield to block. I imagine he would be an all-around character with decent stats across the board. The Galarian bird Zapdos joins the roster, a quick kicking fighter. Zacian would deal slashes at the opposing Pokemon. If there is a Pokken Tournament 2, I definitely think Zacian is a shoo-in for an inclusion. Hisuian Zoroark's unique normal ghost typing would make it an interesting addition to the roster. That, and it's also a very popular Pokemon, is why I've decided to include it. And the last two fighters are Urshifu and Urshifu again. Both Rapid Strike and Single Strike styles of Urshifu would join the roster. I could easily see choosing to side with the Rapid or Single Strike style being a part of the main story. And with that, there's my prediction of the hopefully happening Pokken Tournament 2. But you may have noticed that there are no Generation 9 Pokemon included. This is because the games are brand new, and Pokken Tournament 2 likely entered development before the games were published. I've opted to include 2 Generation 9 fighters via DLC, similar to how Blastoise and Aegislash were DLC in Pokken DX. The first of which is the newly introduced evolution to Primate, Annihilate. He would be a pretty standard fighter, but he would also be able to charge up his anger to attack faster and harder. And the final Pokemon I've chosen to be the pick for DLC is another replacement Pokemon, Walking Wake. The Paradox version of Suicune would be fast on its feet and play similar to the original Suicune, but with a more emphasis on close quarter combat. And now, with that, is my complete roster prediction for Pokken Tournament 2. Speaking of Paradox Pokemon, have you ever wondered what just are these Pokemon? Well, if you have, subscribe to my channel as I plan on making a video answering what even are Paradox Pokemon. And also, like the video please.